I'm Bill Kassel, and this is Free Expression. This program is all about conveying the Christian message from a Catholic point of view and defending the liberty which makes it possible to do that. We consider whether American ideals are consistent with Catholic teaching, and we discuss a new book about the beloved Saint Padre Pio. Join us. Sit back and enjoy some free expression. A favorite charge leveled by those who prefer to take their religion in small doses is that America isn't a Christian nation. They maintain that the Founding Fathers were really a bunch of deists and our Constitution owes more to the secular philosophers of the Enlightenment than it does to the Bible. Well, you can debate that till the cows come home, but I think America's ideals at least reflect Christian principles. Another question, though, is whether America's ideals are compatible with traditional teachings of the Catholic Church. Kevin Vance directs Benedictine College's Center for Constitutional Liberty, and he explores that issue both in his teaching and in a new video. He's here now. Kevin, thanks for speaking with us.
Hi, Bill. Thanks for having me.
Some people will insist that America is the product of the Protestant Reformation. Others will object and tell you to forget the Pilgrims, look instead to St. Augustine or St. Thomas Aquinas for America's roots. And still others say you're all wrong. Credit the pagans of ancient Greece. What's your take on that?
Well, I really liked the measured way in which you introduced it. In my mind, one question is the intellectual and religious origins, and then another question for us is to what degree those principles of America's founding and the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence are compatible with the political teachings and tradition of Catholics over the last several centuries, and especially the teachings of the popes. And I think certainly on the latter question, I think the case can be made, and indeed I make the case and hope to make some of it today, that the American political principles embodied in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and the political project in general are compatible with Catholic principles.
Okay.
On the question of origins, I think there's a mix of different philosophical and intellectual origins. Certainly the Enlightenment played a role. I mean, I think the influence of John Locke in some ways is undeniable on the founders, although, and I don't know if we have time to get into this, but I think maybe not in the ways that are most directly in contradiction to the natural law tradition or to the teachings of the Catholic Church. In terms of the Protestant origins, I think maybe we could learn something from Tocqueville during his writings about America in the early 19th century, that it's probably good for us to hearken back to that Puritan founding, and for no other reason than to emphasize that the American political project requires individuals building communities and associations together, as the early Puritans did, showing that religion can be a centerpiece of a community's orientation. And third, and maybe most importantly for us in America, I mean, Tocqueville points to the definition of liberty by the early Puritans and by Cotton Mather, that the true meaning of liberty is connected to the pursuit of the good and doing the good, rather than just some kind of license to do whatever one wants. I think those are the elements of the Protestant founding that is very much compatible with the ideas of most Catholics in America.
Now, of course, the nation has grown, the nation has changed. We are no longer the country of farmers and small merchants. Now we are involved in capitalism on a large scale. Yet the Catholic Church has a sort of, I don't know, what would you call it, a communitarian coloring? Solidarity with your neighbor and all of that. How does that fit in with our modern capitalist democracy, or our republicanism, if you prefer?
Yeah, that's an important question. I think that the Church's teaching is just that. It's educative for us as American citizens, and it should be shaping the way that we build our political economy. I don't think that the American Founding Project needs to necessarily be about pure individual economic freedom and treating people as if they're just sort of parts of an economic equation. I think there's a lot of room in the American political tradition, including that of the American founders, for teachings like Catholic teachings on the dignity of workers and on the necessity for those who are shaping the economy to take into account the needs of the poor and maybe in our day the needs of maybe working-class Americans who might be getting left behind and that sort of thing.
How do you sell this idea to a country as diverse as ours? There are many people who, if you even raise the idea of being consistent with Catholic Church teaching, they would react in absolute horror. They would say, no, we can't have any dominant church. Our Constitution proposes the separation of church and state. How do you get over that kind of hurdle?
Well, I don't think we need to necessarily insist that America is Catholic in a way that would prevent all people of goodwill from being good citizens that we can collaborate with on various projects in America. But I do think that there's a lot of ways in which the American political project, including that juridical separation of church and state, I think points away from philosophical liberalism and toward an understanding of, say, the freedom of the church or of institutional autonomy that leaves lots of room for Catholic citizens to practice our faith. And maybe just to say one thing about what I have in mind about that, one could argue that a strict understanding of philosophical liberalism would not single out the religious associations for special prerogatives or for freedom from laws that otherwise apply to all citizens. And so from the Catholic perspective, we can see this in state laws that try to require even priests who are hearing confessions to report various things to civil authorities. The American political tradition, from very early on, early in the 19th century, when Catholics started becoming more and more involved in our political life, has created space for the Catholic Church to flourish and be free in this country, including institutional protections for things like confession and for property rights and things like that for corporate associations. And in America, unlike in most parts of the Christian world, the Pope has always been totally free to appoint the bishops of his choice.
Yeah, let's look at it from that point of view. What does the Church think about America? My impression is that the late Pope Francis had a certain distrust, if you will, when it came to the United States. The new Pope Leo is an American, of course, but he spent a good part of his life in priesthood in Latin America, and I'm not altogether sure what he feels about his home country.
That's right. I'll be very, very interested to hear what the new Holy Father has to say about his upbringing and the political traditions of our regime, and I expect that he'll say something about it next year during our semi-quincentennial in this country, and certainly during his first, whenever he eventually comes to this country. On Pope Francis, he may well have been suspicious or skeptical of various aspects of our culture, maybe even of our political culture, but when it comes to the founding documents and the founding principles, like all of his most recent predecessors, when Pope Francis visited Washington during that visit in 2015, during the World Meeting of Families, he hearkened back to the principles of the Declaration of Independence, and he suggested that those principles of the Declaration were very much in line with human dignity and with Catholic social teaching.
Tell us a little bit about Benedictine's Center for Constitutional Liberty. What do you have going on there?
Sure. So we are a center at the college. We're here in Atchison, Kansas, about an hour from downtown Kansas City. And the mission of the Center for Constitutional Liberty is to spread a deeper understanding of America's founding principles to our students and to the community, and also to show how those principles intersect with Catholic political thought and to sort of bring them into dialogue with each other. Practically speaking, we're involved in a lot of projects to help shape not the political beliefs of our students, but to help shape them as Catholic citizens in this country and to provide opportunities for them to become more involved in America's public life.
I know that Benedictine has an active interest in media. You guys have been turning out a lot of video series, and you're involved in that. What is your role in all of that communication effort?
That's right. So that's part of our public initiative for the Center for Constitutional Liberty. And so there's a video series available right now, basically how American principles are compatible with, and in some ways are even deeply indebted to Catholic political teaching, and especially the natural law tradition.
Where can people go to view that material and maybe find out more about your work?
The best way to find out more about the Center for Constitutional Liberty is at transforming.benedictine.edu/centers/constitutional.
Kevin Vance, Director of Benedictine College's Center for Constitutional Liberty. Thanks very much for taking a couple of minutes and reflecting on these thoughts and ideas.
Thanks very much for having me.
The name Padre Pio is certainly familiar. So is that smiling, bearded face we recognize as the image of a modern saint. Who was this Franciscan priest said to have miraculous powers? Mary O'Regan has a new book from Sophia Institute Press that delves deeply into the life of this unique individual. It's called Padre Pio and You. She's with us now. Mary, thanks for taking time to share your knowledge of this revered Christian figure.
Thank you, Bill, for the honor of having me on your show.
As recognizable as the name and face might be, not everybody knows a lot about Padre Pio. Could you give us just a quick sketch of his life?
He was born in 1887 in southern Italy to a very pious family. He was called after St. Francis, and he was actually his mother's fourth child. He was born in his parents' bedroom. It was a one-roomed house. His mother had already buried two children before little Francis was born, and she dedicated him to St. Francis, said that if he lived, she would give anything to St. Francis. And I think that she didn't realize that Padre Pio was going to be the second St. Francis. So from his mother's arms to being welcomed by the world's arms, Padre Pio became the world's second St. Francis. He became a Franciscan priest when he was 23, and he went on to have the miraculous stigmata. He was given the wounds by Christ himself. He bore them for 58 years. For the first 8 years in secret, they were invisible to human eyes. And then for the last 50 years, he bore them for all to see on his hands and feet. He was a miraculous wonder worker who had many other charisms, including that the wounds he bore gave off a beautiful scent, an absolute celestial perfume of roses and violets.
These stigmata marks were examined by medical specialists and verified, right?
Yes, they were hailed as being miraculous.
I read somewhere that a doctor actually calculated that he could pass something all the way through the wounds from one side to the other. But I understand that the church was a little reluctant at first to herald this unique situation. They kind of kept Padre Pio under wraps for a while, didn't they?
They did. His reputation was influenced directly by whoever happened to be the ruling pope. And if the ruling pope held Pio in high esteem and believed in the stigmata, things were good for Padre Pio. But on the other hand, if the pope did not believe in Padre Pio and held him in low esteem, then things were bad for Padre Pio. When Padre Pio first got the stigmata, the pope was Pope Benedict XV. He was very, very, very much in favor of Padre Pio, believed totally in his charisms and believed that the stigmata were given to him by Christ himself. That means that when he first was known as a stigmatist, when he became a celebrity in Italy by way of the newspapers covering his stigmata extensively, he enjoyed a good reception in the Vatican in the early years. That changed, however, later on when the Pope that succeeded Benedict XV did not believe in Padre Pio's miraculous stigmata, especially in the early years of his papacy.
Now, he was reported to have other very unique mystical powers as well. He levitated, and he was able to be in different places at the same time. What was the story on all of those claims?
He was able to bilocate. he was able to be in two places at once so that he could serve two different sets of people in two different locations, sometimes very, very far apart. He never left his native Italy. He never, ever left the Franciscan friary by normal means. He never went by plane out of Italy, but at the same time, he was seen in Hawaii while also being in his native Italy. He bilocated to Hawaii to help someone.
And these instances were documented? There were people who attested to these phenomena?
Yes, there were many, many different witnesses. There was even an occasion when he was having a lot of difficulty with the Pope in the 1920s. In 1925, the Pope at the time, Pope Pius XI, was thinking of suspending Padre Pio completely from priestly ministry, and he was essentially going to bring to bear on Padre Pio the censure that is reserved for the worst type of priests, clerical abusers. Padre Pio never left San Giovanni Rotondo, where he was in his monastery, but at the same time he bilocated to the Vatican. He limped in on his stigmatized feet that had been punctured with the wounds of crucifixion. He knelt before the Pope and said, "Please, for the good of the Church, do not take this course of action." The Pope checked with all the Swiss guards, and they had never seen a Franciscan friar come or go. It had been a case of Padre Pio bilocating to the Pope to kneel before him and plead his case that he was a genuine stigmatist and he wasn't to be suspended. And that's a case where bilocation actually saved his ministry.
Now, there was another unique instance in his life. He met a young priest named Karl Wojtyła and made a prediction about his future.
Yes, this was in the 1940s. Padre Pio at the time was 60 years old. It was just after World War II, and he was visited by a dashing, handsome, young Polish priest who was 27 at the time and who had had a difficult time in the seminary because he'd had to hide a lot of the time from the communists, and he made the arduous journey through bombed roads and bridges that had been fallen apart. He would have probably had to walk over streams and walk over many fields for many miles to get to Padre Pio. An arduous pilgrimage. This young Polish priest, Karol Wojtyła, comes to Padre Pio. The interesting thing is that they had a conversation about the stigmata. The young Polish priest asked Padre Pio, "What is the wound that causes you the most suffering?" And without reservation, Padre Pio answered, "It is the shoulder wound that causes me the most pain and which no one knows about and has never been treated." Now, this may seem that Padre Pio is just answering a question directly to a young 27-year-old Polish priest, but this conversation is actually extraordinary and unique and remarkable all at the same time. As someone who spent 8 years writing a book on Padre Pio, it took me many years of study to know, Bill, why this conversation was so remarkable, because Padre Pio could only answer to one person as regards the stigmata. He could only answer to one person who posed him a question directly, and that was the Pope. Because during Padre Pio's lifetime, he was under very strict obedience not to discuss the stigmata with anyone who did not have the correct documentation. The few people who had the correct documentation from the Pope were the various Vatican inquisitors, the archbishops who came to ask Padre Pio to swear on the Gospels and tell them the truth regarding the stigmata, and doctors who were given very, very special permission. We're only talking about a few people who were given that permission from the Holy See, from the Vatican, to ask Padre Pio as to the stigmata. But this young Polish priest comes, and without documentation, he's given a very direct answer as to the fact that it is the shoulder wound. Padre Pio was, as someone who was bearing the wounds of Christ, he was talking to someone who he knew would be the vicar of Christ, and he gives him that answer directly. He treats the young 27-year-old Father Karol as though he is already Pope, because Padre Pio sees Father Karol so. He knows he's going to be the Pope. And without asking for documentation, he gives him the direct answer. The only person who can ask and receive answers as regards Padre Pio's stigmata is the Pope.
Yeah, and of course it was Pope John Paul II who canonized Padre Pio in 2002, so all kinds of irony involved in that. Now, aside from these restrictions and spiritual obstacles that were placed in his way, Padre Pio also had some ongoing health problems. He suffered with quite a few many ailments through his life, didn't he?
He did. He suffered a number of ailments, but he was very, very quick to say that they weren't actually physical so much as they were demonic harassments caused him to feel weak in his body, and it was spiritual oppression. He suffered from demonic oppression all throughout his life, from the time he was in his mother's womb to the very, very end of his life. He wasn't so much physically sickly. He was actually very strong, more strong physically than is properly known. But he did suffer an awful lot from demonic persecution and the devil himself going after Padre Pio to interfere with him so that he would be of a lesser strength and could not reach souls, because he said, Padre Pio said, my whole life is dedicated to snatching souls from Satan's grasp.
Now, you have titled this book in a very personal way. It's Padre Pio and You. What is the significance of that? What makes Padre Pio special to the individual believer?
Padre Pio is the second St. Francis. There was a prophecy it would be one of St. Francis's fold that would bring a third of the world to Christ. I researched at least 2 conversations where Padre Pio was asked about this, and he tacitly agreed that it was him, and he was very dissatisfied with this. He was very dissatisfied that he is the person who is the fulfillment of the prophecy. He'll bring a third of the world to Christ, which is 1 in 3. He said, no, I want more. I don't just want a third, I want the whole of humanity. So instead of being sort of puffed up or becoming very prideful and proud and arrogant about the fact that he was the person who would lead to the fulfillment of the prophecy, he was actually not that happy about it, but at the same time, the prophecy would appear to be coming true. Because Padre Pio and You, there is he is a very, very powerful saint that anyone who really takes an interest in him makes him a guide to becoming a better Christian primarily, but to ultimately saving our souls and saving those who we love. We'll find that he is a remarkable father figure in that he wants to bring your soul to Christ, to be happy in this life, and to serve Jesus in this life, and to spend all eternity with him in the next. And Padre Pio is the saint of our time to bring people to Christ. And that's why I've titled the book Padre Pio and You, most especially for the modern American, because Padre Pio had a huge fondness for Americans, so much so that he wanted all Americans as his spiritual children.
Why did he feel a special affinity with America?
We need to go back to his childhood. He was born to, his parents were farmers, and they farmed a 5-acre plot of land. They weren't poor, neither were they peasants. They owned a small bit of land, but they only worked to put food on the table. They didn't have the spare money needed to put Padre Pio through school and to put him through seminary. So his father, in order so that Padre Pio could train to be a Franciscan priest, his father went to America. He went to the East Coast. He went to modern-day Queens, and he worked on a farm. His father spoke no English going to America, but he was treated exceptionally well by all the Americans who employed him and treated him like he was family. Padre Pio always retained a special love of Americans because had his father not been given employment and not been treated so well, had his special gifts. His father was a farmer who knew an awful lot about animal husbandry, and his father was promoted to being farm manager. And Padre Pio always felt a debt of great gratitude to Americans because of the way they treated his beloved dad. He made a special request of the Lord that all Americans become his spiritual children, and he said that anyone, and he actually said this to his favorite person. He said this to he had a friend called Joe from Pennsylvania, and Joe Peluso was his name. He was an Italian-American. Padre Pio's favorite person was Joe Peluso. And he said to Joe Peluso, any American who wants to become my spiritual child, the answer is yes. So Padre Pio and You, I'm from County Cork. I live in America now. And I don't think it's an accident that I do, because any American I meet, if they request that of Padre Pio, that they want to be his spiritual child, the answer is affirmatively yes.
Wonderful. The book is Padre Pio and You by Mary O'Regan. Where can people find out more about it and get their hands on it?
They can get their hands on it, Bill, if they go to the Sophia Press Institute website. Sophia Press is the foremost, I believe, is the foremost Catholic publishers, and that's not because they publish me, because they are an amazing publishing house. And you may also buy the book on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and anywhere fine books are sold.
Mary O'Regan, thanks very much for being with us. A fascinating figure, a saint of our time. This is certainly relevant to all of us, especially us in the United States. Thanks very much.
You're very, very welcome, and thank you for having me.
If you've been listening to these shows online but would like to hear them on the radio, tell your local Catholic station. Free Expression with Bill Kassel is available for broadcast free of charge. Ask your Catholic station to contact us by email, billkassel@sbcglobal.net. That's BILLKASSEL, all one word, billkassel@sbcglobal.net. And don't forget to support your local station. In this time of censorship and so-called cancel culture, Catholic radio is becoming increasingly important as an alternative media source. Our programming is based on the Word of God and the teaching of His Church, and we bring you the factual, truthful information you aren't getting from the mainstream media. Support Catholic radio. Your generosity keeps Catholic outlets on the air, and donations to broadcast ministries can be tax-deductible. Urge your friends and relatives to tune in as well. And please, let me know what you think about these shows. I'd love your suggestions on topics we might explore that touch the lives of Catholics today. Email me with your thoughts, billkassel@sbcglobal.net. Be with us next time when we explore other aspects of religious communication and look deeper into the great Christian heritage of free expression. Free Expression with Bill Kassel is a production of Good Shepherd Catholic Radio and Company Publications, where good books, good music, and good radio are always good company. Dan Curris provided technical assistance. Theme and incidental music are by Dan Adam. The program was produced and directed by Bill Kassel. This is Good Shepherd Catholic Radio.